Hello everyone. My name is Dr. Andrew Kerrigan, and I am a lecturer in the Centre for Global Programmes. It's a pleasure to be giving you this screencast. Hopefully, by the end of this, we will have learned a little bit about the Torrance test for measuring creativity, and you will be ready to actually do a simplified version of the Torrance test. So here we go. Okay, so we start with some questions. How creative do you think you are on a scale of 1 to 10? Obviously, you're viewing this screencast by yourself. So these are reflection questions. And you can also think about evidence for your creativity. So, for example, are you musical? Do you do creative writing? Or perhaps you are an engineer and you've solved a problem using a non-standard method, for example. Okay, so that's just some reflection. You can pause this video and just make some notes on this. You'll be asked to share your notes with other participants in the first seminar. So moving on, what is the Torrance test of creative thinking? Well, it's a standardized test of creativity used with children and adults all around the world. There are many standardized tests of creativity, but this is the most widespread and the most cited in the literature. It's been around for some time. It was first developed in the post-Second World War period by Dr. E. Paul Torrance, whom you can see here at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Torrance worked as a psychologist in the US military during the Second World War, and he was doing research into the psychological characteristics of pilots who had survived after being shot down. So pilots, for example, who had parachuted into the wilderness with minimal resources and then had to survive and find their way back to safety. His basic idea was that an element of risk-taking and what we would call resourcefulness, making use of the limited resources that you have, were key in creativity to survive. So after the war, Professor Torrance joined the University of Minnesota. It was a time when technology was transforming the world. The first satellites had been put up by the Soviet Union, and of course, Dr. Torrance was an American. And the US government were very keen to have new educational practices that would prepare students for to contribute to new technology. And actually, we live in very, very similar times at the moment. So as I said, it's the most widely used test of creativity, and it has two parts, thinking creatively with pictures and with words. So the first part, thinking creatively with pictures. A typical task is to combine shapes. So for example, there's a task where you get a circle and you have to use the circle as many times as you can or as many times as you want in order to make a creative drawing. Okay, so here you have an example of Mickey Mouse, very creative, and a chain, less creative. In another such task, you have different shapes, rectangles, triangles, circles, but it's the same idea. You have to combine them to make a different image. Okay. Incidentally, with all these tasks with pictures, you have to give your picture a name. Okay. So you have to label your picture. Okay, and lastly, I'll just move my image here. Um, Lastly, you have an unfinished drawing. Okay, so here you can see something like some 3 lines here and a circle, and you have to, excuse me, you have to complete the drawing in any way that you want. Okay, and again, you give your picture a title. Okay. Okay, so next one is thinking creatively with words. This is the second part of the Torrance test. And again, there are 3 different tasks, which I'm going to explain to you. There's product improvement. So, for example, you're given a product like this stuffed toy elephant, and you're asked, how could you modify, change, adapt this um, product to make it better, to improve it? Another task is unusual uses. So you have a cardboard box here, and you have to come up with as many unusual uses for the box as possible. The more uses you come up with, the more creative your response will be. And another task is called Just Imagine. So you have an impossible or highly unlikely situation. In this case, it is you can make yourself invisible, and you are asked to write about, to describe all the things that might happen if this situation was possible. Okay, so how would the world be different? How would your life be different if you could make yourself invisible? Okay, moving on then. So how is the Torrance test scored? The responses are evaluated by trained examiners according to 5 criteria. One of the criterion is fluency. So, for example, when you are creating your pictures, how many different pictures could you come up with? When you're describing how the world would be different if you were invisible, how many differences? How long was your text? Originality is another criterion. So, for example, you saw some of the pictures were of faces. These are very unoriginal. Elaboration is another criterion. So, how much detail can you add to your picture or your text? Um, the degree of abstraction is a fourth criterion, and this is particularly suitable for the pictures. So, for example, if you draw something that looks like 2 stars and a moon, a very unabstract title would be 2 stars and a moon. But you could also call this picture the flag of an unknown country, which would be a much more abstract title to give your drawing. And lastly is something called resistance to premature closure. Okay, so this is when you resist the obvious, simplistic solutions. So, for example, if you have 3 lines together like this, you resist making a square by drawing a 4th line. You try to view it as something open. So keeping your options open, resisting simple solutions where you limit the possibilities. That is resistance to premature closure. Okay, so the original studies for the Torrance test were done in the 1960s. It's when the test was developed. It's when it was trialed. It was done with a group of school children, I believe, in Chicago. And over time, the same group of subjects were remeasured, and the measurements were cross-referenced with socioeconomic indicators of creativity and achievement. So this is something which you can follow up yourself by reading, for example, this book, or by reading some of these articles. So there was a number of follow-ups, most recently in the 2000s, so after 50 years of the original study. So just to give you one sentence in conclusion, these studies, it is claimed, demonstrate the relationship between scores on tests carried out in early childhood with personal creative achievements as much as 50 years later. So the big claim is that the Torrance test is a reliable and valid indicator of creative achievements. This is highly debatable, but it is the most widespread used test of creativity still used across the world today. Okay, so I hope you're excited about doing the Torrance test. We're going to do a simplified version of the Torrance test, and I'll send you a link for this. It's a Google document which you can download. So it's based on the test that I've just described. There are two parts. The first part is thinking creatively with images. There are 3 tasks, the exact same tasks that I have explained to you, and the time limit is 20 minutes for these 3 tasks. Part 2 is thinking with words. Again, it's the exact same 3 tasks and 20 minutes. So I'd like you to download the Google Doc into a Word file if possible, and I'd like you to type your answers to the written task into the Word document. Okay. For the drawing tasks, it would probably be easiest if you use a pen and paper and you drew your answers. Then you can scan your answers or simply take a photograph of the piece of paper. So the real Torrance test is graded by professionals with training in interpreting the subject's responses. We will carry out a very simplified form of self-scoring. So basically for each of your responses, so you will have 3 responses for the drawing task and 3 responses for the text task. So for each of these 6 responses, please give your answer a score from 1 to 5 for each of the 5 scoring criteria. So the 5 scoring criteria are fluency, originality, elaboration, abstraction, and resistance to premature closure. Don't worry if you have difficulty scoring your text, even if you only use 2 or 3 of these criteria. I think that's enough for a reflection. Now, please, when you've finished your tasks, as I said, send us the Word document back. I'll put instructions about that in the email. And please send us the images back. So these will either be scanned copies of the paper or photographs of the paper which you take with your phone. Please send us these back because we will be using your completed Torrance test answers in the first seminar on this program. Okay. If you want to know more about what I've been talking about in this screencast, here are 4 links for you, and the link to this Google Slides show is also in the email. Okay, so it's been a pleasure talking to you this evening, and I wish you all the best with your Torrance test.